Hi, I just read Furyborn, and boy does it live up to that title. Even when it comes to this video, because this is the third time I've recorded this. Alright, let's just go to the book. Let's go. Reason 1, the setting. There are two point of view characters in this book that exist 1,000 years apart from each other. Riel is here, Eliana is 1,000 years in the future. So how come I can't tell? A lot happens in 1,000 years. I should be able to tell which is which. But somehow the setting in both of these times is almost exactly the same. The only difference is that in Eliana's time, the Empire controls everything. That's it. The two settings being so similar doesn't even make sense within the story or the history of this world. So when Riel dies, that's not a spoiler, it happens in chapter 1, when Riel dies, magic leaves the world. It's gone. Which would mean that anything people used to use magic for, like farming, navigation, generating energy, that all has to suddenly be done without magic. So what technology did they develop to cover this? I couldn't tell you. The book won't tell you either. Like in 1,000 years after losing magic, humanity would need some huge technological advancements just to keep feeding everybody. Because if you have magic, you're gonna use it. You can't tell me this universe has basically earthbenders and waterbenders, and they don't use those powers to make farming easier. So now that those powers are gone, how does anyone do anything? Was there a famine? Did people starve? Like, what happened? And this doesn't just apply to architecture? This doesn't just apply to agriculture. I use that as an example. Every industry would be affected by a loss of magic, including architecture. So, the Empire takes over. And there are two possibilities here. Either the Empire started conquering before the magic was lost, in which case I would ask, how were they able to keep conquering? Or they started to take over after everyone lost magic, in which case how did they do that? We are never shown what makes the Empire so powerful. How did they conquer so much land? And why were none of the other countries able to put up an effective resistance? I just keep thinking about Avatar still, and how the reason the Fire Nation was able to kill all the airbenders is they had more advanced technology than everyone else at the time. What does this empire have? I don't know. The book doesn't know either. Reason 2. If you're writing a story in third person with multiple POVs, that alternate in a set pattern throughout the whole book, you should not need to tell me which character we are following at the start of each chapter. I should be able to tell from the character voice and the setting which character it is without even mention of their name. But like I said, this is third person, so you're probably going to say their name in the first couple of sentences anyway. The fact that the writer or the editor or whoever thought that those name tags were necessary means that somebody knew that Riel and Eliana's voices and settings were so similar that they're nearly indistinguishable, and they didn't fix it. They just slapped a lazy name tag band-aid over it. Reason 3, the romance. Gosh, I have so much to say about this. Eliana's romance hasn't really happened yet, so I'm not going to talk about it, but I know who she gets with later in the series, and I'm not happy about it. Riel and Audric. First off, we barely get to see these two interact. Like, it's clear Riel likes him. We get maybe a bit of a hint that he likes her too, but there's no indication that they would have any actual romantic chemistry or that they would work as a couple at all. They're just some friends who are maybe pining to each other, then boom, they have sex. Like, out of nowhere. Also, Riel is at a point in the story where she really needs the approval of both the common people and the nobles in this kingdom in order to stay alive. And she knows that Audric is engaged. So why would she take the risk of screwing him at this point? They'll kill her if they think she's evil. And does she really value getting her rocks off over her life? This also makes Riel seem like such an unlikable person. Audric and Ludovine are engaged, and they've also basically been the only people who are 100% on Riel's side. They've been trying to help her since the start, she grew up with them, they're her best friends, and she throws that all out the window. Ludovine has been nothing but nice and supportive for her to most of her life, and she repays that by screwing Ludovine's fiancé. Like, why? How am I supposed to care what happens to Riel when she has proven that she is supremely unlikable. At this point, I want her to fail and die, because Eliana's story is way more interesting anyway. Sure, Ludovine forgives her at one point, but Riel couldn't have possibly known that was going to happen, and that whole scene makes Ludovine seem like a way too gullible, way too forgiving dumbass at best. And like, I could kinda maybe see Riel going for it and trying to screw Audric, but he's the real problem here. Because up until this point, the main characterization he gets is that everybody says he's the best, he'll be a great king, he's a good dude. And what little we see of him in the story to this point seems to back that up, and then he cheats on his fiancée. Like, obviously everyone was wrong about this guy, I guess. It's just so incredibly out of character with what we've seen from him up until now. Not only does he not seem like the type of person who would cheat, but he also doesn't seem like the type of person who would risk being with Riel, knowing that if someone finds out, she will probably be killed. Especially since right before they do it, he was just talking about how much he wants to protect his friends. Literally one moment he's like, I want you to live and I'm gonna protect you. And then the next moment he is actively participating in something that could get her killed. So this last bit might be a bit controversial, we'll see. I listen to the audiobook. I like to listen to audiobooks at work just to pass the time. The genres listed under this book are series and YA. So tell me why it contains a graphic sex scene. Okay, it probably wasn't that graphic. I did skip through most of it. But there are like 5 minutes of the narrator... What are you doing? Why? My cat's being weird. Anyway, it's probably not that graphic. I did skip through most of it. But there are like 5 minutes of the narrator describing these two having sex. And I don't mind sex scenes in books, but I draw the line when you are writing a young adult fantasy book and it gets to the point where the only reason for the sex scene continuing is to arouse the reader. If you want to write erotica, go write erotica. Don't disguise it as young adult fantasy. There is no purpose for that sex scene to be as long and involved as it was, except to get the readers all hot and bothered. You can have them have sex and get caught and face the consequences, and it can have the same narrative weight without subjecting me to 5 minutes of you trying to get me turned on. It is possible to write a sex scene, believe it or not, as a character moment, a plot moment, for delivering a moral, whatever you want, without writing it in a tone that's meant to entice the reader. A sex scene can be sexy for the characters without being enticing to the audience. When you write a sex scene where the sole purpose is meant to make the reader horny, that's erotica. There's nothing wrong with erotic stories or with books that contain explicit scenes, but that's not what Furyborn was advertised as. I want to be clear, I'm not upset about the presence of sex in this book, nor am I upset that sex scenes exist in literature. I'm upset because Furyborn has this sex scene with a pretty graphic tone, and it was not clear that type of content would be in this book. If I wanted to read an adult story, I would go read an adult story. If I'm reading something that's not labeled as explicit or adult or erotica, I shouldn't have to prepare myself for that type of content. If I had known that this book was going to contain that much detail on their intercourse, I wouldn't have bought it. That's it. Bye.